This week, Jonah got more work done on the Kawasaki. We got the Harley trunk painted, polished, and ready to put back together. We also started putting pistons back on the Fordson tractor block. I'd like to give a shout out to one of my past graduates, Kevin Martin, who is currently a pilot instructor at Liberty University. He informed me that my safety wiring skills were better than some of the airframe and power plant mechanics that he deals with sometimes. So I definitely appreciate that. It makes me feel like what we're doing here is good. For everyone, thanks for tuning in. Everything on the trunk has been finished off. Now Alejandro is going to put on some primer. I'm ready to block the Harley trunk down for paint. The nice thing is I only have to worry about the sides where those emblems were that I did the body repair on, and the corners where the cracks were. The majority of this is covered by either panels, speakers, the entire rear light assembly and all. So all of it doesn't have to be too perfect, but these side areas and near the back here, that does.
The blocking and wet sanding is done. Now it is time to lay down the blue. I'm putting on the last coat of blue, then it'll be ready for the clear.
Alejandro's got the blue on, it looks real nice, but he's a little paranoid about putting on the clear, so he wants me to spray a little bit first. However, he is going to finish it up, and it's going to be his finished product. Got a small run in the back of the trunk for the Harley. Alejandro's getting that wet sanded out. We've also got a little bug on this side. But once we get those out and get it polished off, this will be ready to start putting back together and get it back on the bike.
With the trunk wet sanded, I'm going to begin using rubbing compound. Now I'm following it up with machine polish.
With the Harley trunk finished, it's time to start putting it back together and get ready to mount it back on the bike. Then it'll be time to do the lid to the trunk, which I've got something a little special planned for. One of the saddlebags is all together and back on the bike. We have to do the other side, then we'll get the trunk on there. There's a couple little things that we need to wrap up to get the bike complete and ready to ride, but we'll have that stuff done pretty soon. And a message to one of my other past graduates, Mike Pigg, since this thing is very close to being done, keep on the lookout for that other bike coming out of that crypt, because it's going to be the next one on this lift and it's going to be coming real soon. Glad to see he's got his daughter in on the project, as well as his wife. and a future technician there in the background. In an effort to make this bike look more like a standard, the fairing and lower panels are going to be coming off probably permanently. We'll be making a decision on how to remount this gauge cluster at a later time. Someone installed handlebar spacers that Jonah is now taking out as he doesn't want them on the bike.
Because I removed the risers, I have to install shorter bolts for the handlebars. I'm torquing the new handlebar riser bolts to 162 inch-pounds. Because the fairing is not going back on, I have to relocate the horns. I've decided to mount them on the lower triple clamp. Because the holes on the horn mounting bracket were too close together, I used a rotary burr tool to oval them out.
With all the brake work that was done on this bike, Jonah's got it all back together. Now he's bleeding the air out of the system. I'm ready to start putting the pistons into the Fordson tractor block. I've got my new rings ready to go onto the pistons. The oil control ring and the second compression ring are installed on the piston. I'm going to do the first one now. Both of these are identical. A lot of times they're not, so you want to make sure that you're reading the directions or do your research to figure out which ring goes where, because sometimes it does make a difference. But on this one it doesn't, but it does matter which side or which end faces up. And this one has a dot on it, just like the other one did, so we want to make sure the dot faces up. And then we're going to open up the ring and get it set up onto the piston. I'm just going to expand it like that. Now most of the time you should use a tool to do that. You got to be really careful because these are cast and they'll break very easily. But I've had pretty good luck doing it this way. They do make a special tool for that, which we do have, but they're just as easy to put on that way as long as you're careful. I'm ready to put the first piston in. I've got the rings on the piston, and I've also got my ring compressor on the piston as well. Now this one, as you'll see, is only on the oil control ring assembly. On most pistons, we have 2 compression rings at the top and an oil control ring assembly immediately below that, but above the piston pin. But this one is below that on the bottom part of the skirt. So I've got a ring compressor to capture that one. We're going to get the piston in up to that point with the oil control ring in the cylinder. Then I'm going to come back and grab the 2 compression rings and then put the whole piston in. So the piston, I've got the piston started in the cylinder. Give this a good squeeze. Then I'm going to take my handle of my hammer and press it in. Okay, we'll knock it in. Alright, looks like it went. Beautiful. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is get my compression rings. I'll get the piston down a little bit further and get the compression rings lined up the way I want them. I'm going to put them 180 apart. So I've got the opening to the top ring facing up to me. I'll get the other one down at exactly 6 o'clock. Now I'm going to take and compress both of these rings at the same time and then get them pressed into place. Squeeze that nice and tight, keep it even. Go down until it seats tight on the block. Then I'm going to give it a nice sharp strike, get the piston pushed in. Just like that. With the piston all the way down the cylinder and connecting rod onto the crank journal, we're going to put our shims in and our main cap back on, along with some plastic gauge, and that's going to tell us what the oil clearance is going to be when everything is torqued correctly. If we don't have enough clearance, we're going to have to add some shims. If we have too much clearance, then we'll take some shim away. Then once we have that, we got the clearance correct, what the specifications are, then we can put everything back together with a little bit of oil, get it torqued down, move on to the next piston. With the first piston in the tractor block, I'm ready to check the clearance for the rod bearing. And to do that, I'm going to use plastic gauge. The green spaghetti looking piece you see on the white paper is the plastic gauge. We're going to put that into the rod cap, bolt it onto the rod itself, get it torqued down, then we're going to remove it. And what's going to happen is it's going to compress the plastic gauge, and then we'll be able to measure it with our scale, and that will tell us what the oil clearance is for that journal. You see we have the plastic gauge on the rod cap. We'll get this put on the engine and get it torqued down. The cap is put on, we used the original shims, got it torqued down. Now we're ready to take it back off and see how much the plastic gauge has compressed. So we'll know if we have to add more shims or if it's good enough as it is. So pull the cap off gently. All right, we've got some residue inside of the cap, also on the crankshaft. We'll go ahead and measure the crankshaft itself. Now, this being the plastic gauge, you can see it's got a scale on it, and the scales are duplicated, every inch or so, so that you can rip off sections for the plastic gauge and also to measure. So what we're going to do now is you can see our scale runs from 1/1000th of an inch up to 3/1000ths of an inch. So the idea is we're going to take this scale, lie it right next to or over top of the width, and try to match up the width of the plastic gauge and how much it compressed. By laying the scale next to the plastic gauge that was compressed, we'll be able to use our scale to find the one that's closest, and that'll give us the oil clearance that we're going to have between the crankshaft and the bearing itself. And looking at our scale against the plastic gauge, it looks like 2/1000ths of an inch. We need at least 3/1000ths of an inch to make sure that the oil gets in there, because this is a dipping splash system. It does not have a pressurized lubrication system. So we need to make sure we have enough clearance there. So to do that, we're going to add some shims, and then we'll check it again. Since we had to add shims to try to get more clearance, what I did was I took a couple of shims out of another rod and see how that's going to work for this one. Sometimes you don't have to put as many shims, or you have to add more shims to the different rods depending on how they line up with the crankshaft. But if we end up having to make more shims, we'll do that out of a soda can. And a couple of years ago we did film that, but you're probably going to get to see us do that again with this one. So I'm going to take and put this spacer, or shim rather, on like so. I've already got another piece of plastic gauge ready to go because we can't reuse the old one. And then we're going to put the cap on, torque it again, and then we'll take our measurement and see what kind of clearance we have. We should definitely get more clearance. Hopefully it'll be around the 3 to 4 range, which is what we're looking for. With the addition of the two shims, put everything together, took it apart to remeasure our plastic gauge, and we are now at that point where I want to be, which is a little over 3/1000ths, so that'll be plenty of room for the oil to get in there and lubricate our rod journal. Next time on Bulldog Builds, we'll have the Harley trunk back together and get it mounted back onto the bike. We'll see how far Jonah gets with his Kawasaki, and we'll have the rest of the pistons put back in the Fordson block. See you next week.